So let's open up a new example. And we have the same data that we were looking at before, but now this is an XML. And what we're going to do is we're going to write our own parser to parse this XML. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our own parser to parse this XML using our key value pair syntax that will essentially allow you to define your own key value extractors. And okay, so let's take a look here, and we have a blank format coming in here. Let's just bring in one field, and let's see what we need to do. All right, so there's a couple of decisions here. The first one is, what do we actually want to group and what do we want to discard? So this root object is basically all we want. We're also defining like XML version and encoding and such, and we could bring that in if we want, or we can discard this line together. So let's take a look at discarding, and then we could actually take a look at bringing it in too if we want. So first thing we're going to do is group though. And the first example, we're just going to discard that. So this is all we want basically. So that seems pretty simple. This looks like everything. So this looks like the start pattern starts with root, and then the end pattern is going to be this end root here. So I mean, we could try something like that if we wanted. It really depends on your log lines, how they're coming in. So we can do the same method that we did before, like with halt with. That should work, and let's see what happens. And there you go. So this is the first one. It's not being grouped, and then this is everything that's being grouped together. And we can tell because of this message field. Just take a look at the message field to see what's actually coming into the message. So that's one way to do it. This is probably not the best way though, because what if that changes and it's not root for some reason? Something like this could work. Something even better would be like instead of defining a word character here, probably defining not an angle bracket here, or the greater than sign. So not greater than sign basically, and then n number of them. So that's probably a much better way to define this one. So that's our start pattern, and then we're going to use a halt with pattern, and then we're going to do something very similar, but we're just going to have like that termination character. So basically starts with / and then not a greater than sign. And then that should be our grouper. That should do it. Let's see what happens. And then there we go. So let's take a look at our message field, and it looks like the full thing is actually coming into the message field, but I believe our goal was to not have this full thing coming into the message field. So the reason for that is because we want to do, because so it's actually picking this up here, and that's just because of our regular expression. So we want to define not a question mark. So basically we're going to, so basically this was picking up the question mark, and we just want to pick it up if there's no question mark there. And there we go. So that did it. So now this is its own message on the side. And then if we look at the message field here, we're grabbing exactly what we're looking for. So perfect. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to discard this. So that's super simple. It looks like it's coming in exactly the same every single time. So that's how we're going to do it. So what I usually do is I just paste that in here, and then we go and escape all of our quotes. And that should be double escaped. What happens? There we go. So it matched format 1. This one did not match format 1. This one did match format 1. So perfect. So now what we want to do here is we could just do discard. There we go. So now we're discarding that first line, and now we can just work with this one here. So the next thing that we're going to do now that we have that discarded is we're going to add our next format coming down. All right, and let's remove these, and we'll start new. So the next thing that we're going to be doing is something new, and that is going to be key value pairs. So let's go to the top here, and then key value logs. And so we're going to be basically going through this section of documentation, and key value logs allow you to define your own patterns basically. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick up the key, and then you're going to pick up the value, and then it just depends on the regular expression that you surround it with what you're actually going to pick up. In the case of the documentation here, we have the identifier, or like the key pattern, and then we have the value pattern. And the key pattern is going to grab cached hits, and then the value is going to be 169. Misses will be 11, and it basically just loops through, and it's going to pick these key values out of the log. So that is a really easy way to parse dynamic logs when you don't necessarily know what the key is actually going to be. So it's perfect for structured data, and it's perfect for things like XML. So we're going to take those principles and apply that here. And I'm just going to show you how I think about this. It took me a little bit to kind of wrap my head around how this works, but it's super simple. So basically you have the key identified by just an underscore like that, and then you have the value identified also by the underscore. So this is key, this is value, and then what we're going to be doing is assigning regular expressions before, regular expressions in between them, and then if you need regular expressions after. And then the other thing that we're going to do, since we want it to loop through mostly, is we're going to repeat. But I'm not going to add that right now. I'll show you why we need that in a second. So the next thing that we're going to define is, so let's start with a key. And we're going to want to define a key pattern. And what we have in the documentation is this identifier. This is actually a predefined pattern that we already have that's going to try to match what a label would look like. We could also define our own, and that's usually what I do for the most part. And so the way I do it is I usually just define two patterns. So let's just do that. So let's start with our key pattern, and our key pattern is basically going to be this here, this little piece. So I'm just going to actually paste that, and then what our value pattern is going to be this basically, and I'm going to grab that plus a little bit more. So this is what we want for our value pattern, and then this is how we want to match our keys. So let's just replace this with anything that's not this greater than sign, basically. So not this sign, and then it's going to continue. So what that actually does is it's basically gonna evaluate until it sees this sign here. So it could be anything in here, anything that's not this angle bracket is going to be counted, basically. So that's a pretty sufficient key pattern. And then the value pattern is going to basically be the same thing. So we'll replace this with not this closed one, and then n number of them. And then I think we grabbed a little too much, so we basically just want it to grab only what's inside, not what's outside. So we have the key pattern here, and then the value here. So key equals key pattern, and then value equals value pattern. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to define what's before, what's between, and what's after. So before, what we can do is just look for anything until it sees the angle bracket. And then basically anything but in these angle brackets. And then the key pattern is actually defining everything that's not the end of the angle bracket here. So the next thing, let's take a look at what we have here. So right after this, here we basically just start grabbing the value. So that's how we're going to add that. So we're just going to move that here. And then this is basically the value, and then it's going to terminate basically. So here we go. So this is our XML. It looks very similar to XML. And we're just basically pulling this from as the key, and we're pulling this as the value. And then it's gonna look for the ending pattern, and then we're just going to loop through that. So let's test this. We'll just call this XML. We'll call this discard. We'll test. So our discarding's working. Okay, so this is working, and what we have here is we're only bringing in 2 fields. And earlier I had said that we need to repeat, and this is the reason we need to repeat. So it's just grabbing the first one, HTTP request ID, which is this first thing, and then if it matches, it's going to go to the next. But what we want is, if it matches, we want it to evaluate again, and if it matches, then evaluate again until it's done with that loop. So the way we do that is just declaratively say repeat true. And now if we test it, it should loop through that and give us all of those data that we got in the JSON parser. And then if we wanted to clean it up, we would clean it up similar to the way we actually did it in the JSON parser. So we would add these rewrites in, which we could do actually. Since it's the same data, we're just going to bring in these rewrites that we did before. We could bring in those blacklists and everything if we wanted, but I think everybody gets the point. So this is how XML is going to be parsed.